Hello and welcome to a very special episode of the Racing News 365 podcast. The reason why it's so special, well, joining myself, Nick Golding, and lead editor Ian Parks is a true motorsports legend. It is an absolute honour to welcome onto the podcast three-time Formula One world champion, Sir Jackie Stewart. Sir Jackie, firstly, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It is an absolute honour and a privilege. How are you, and are you enjoying this rare F1 autumn break?
Yes, as always, I still enjoy it enormously. I've been fortunate enough to be able to continue after my career as a driver commercially to some of the biggest companies in the world that have taken an interest in motorsports. And I still love the sport, so I'm quite happy with it.
Ian, how are you? Because this is an unusual F1 break. It feels like we've had so many races, and now we've got the lull before the final 6-race storm.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to have Sir Jackie on. Excuse me, the voice is a little bit croaky, just clear that. Such a pleasure. I've been liaising with Sir Jackie's manager, Andrew, for a little while now, and caught up with the guys in Singapore, which we're going to get onto in a minute, because I know there was a very special event that took place in Singapore that we can discuss. And here we are, over the line, and an absolute honour and a privilege, as you've mentioned, Nick, to have Sir Jackie on our show today.
It was okay, Sir Jackie. I'd actually love to start by talking about the charity you founded in 2016, the Race Against Dementia, because for those who are unaware, the Singapore Grand Prix actually fell on the same weekend as World Alzheimer's Day, which was Saturday, the 21st of September, and the charity put on a brilliant event, Singapore Run, which saw 62 runners from across 9 different countries virtually run the distance of 1 lap each of the Marina Bay circuit, meaning that the charity covered the full race distance. How proud are you of just how globally recognised their charity has become so quickly, but also what it means and how important it is to so many people from so many different countries and backgrounds?
Well, it's a terrible reality, but dementia now takes the life of more people than any other illness in the world. I mean, that's a big statement to make when you hear people talk of cancer and lots of other illnesses that we're aware of. But now our Race Against Dementia programs come around because of Helen, my wife, my teammate, because in those days when I was racing, the wives had a role to play for timekeeping and lap charting, and Helen was very good at that, as was Betty Hill or Jim Clark's girlfriend or whoever it may be. So the Race Against Dementia thing came as a complete shock to me, of course, the fact that there was no cure, and there hasn't been a cure for over 70 years. So therefore, we set about doing it in a similar way, I think, to what we did in Stewart Grand Prix or Paul Stewart Racing, to build something up that didn't exist previously at the level that we set ourselves to take. So we had a big event in Abu Dhabi, in a whole lot of the Grand Prix in the season. But they've been very successful. We've raised a great deal of money. We've got representations now in South Africa. We've got talent. We buy the best young talent in the medical world from the very best. Now that nowadays you can go to find the truly best medical universities, for example, and then the best university talent that comes out. We've been able to do that with the internet we couldn't have done 10 years ago. So it's very strong. We raise money, for example, in Singapore at a dinner, apart from anything else and all the other things that have been done on circuits, etc., around the world. And Helen's got dementia. And that's the reason for my interest to the level that it is. It's the biggest challenge I've ever faced, really, much more than anything in motor racing. That was pretty simple stuff, really, by comparison. But at the same time, I'm still in love with Helen, and I'm still in love with the sport. So really, Helen enjoys watching at the Grand Prix at every time. She came to Silverstone for the first practice day just to see some of the people who have been there all these years ago. So really, our life here, I'm in Switzerland at the present time. Most of my life is in Switzerland. I have a home in England as well. We're up in Buckinghamshire. But Switzerland really is where we've been living since about 1968.
And something that's amazing, obviously, when I was looking at the Race Against Dementia website, and I encourage all our viewers to go and take a look because it's amazing to get a better understanding of everything that the Race Against Dementia charity are doing. Something I came across is the F1 mindset in terms of innovation, resilience, teamwork, attention to detail. How important is that to finding a cure for dementia and understanding how to hopefully prevent it in the future?
Well, that's the great thing about Formula One motorsport. It's a terrific example of problem solving in the fastest possible way. We've been deeply involved with McLaren and with Red Bull since the reality of us finding the dementia problem and trying to find the best talent, and then how do we raise their game to a higher level? Because I don't think there's any business in the world today that so rapidly changes where it's required as Formula One has, with all of, whether it's Mercedes-Benz or whether it was Red Bull, or whether it's McLaren or all the other good teams. So Formula One's played a role in that because we take our PhDs to Red Bull and to McLaren to let them see the workshops, to see people working at a speed that simply doesn't exist in any other business that I know. So we're using Formula One very well, and we've been we're blessed by very kind people. We've had a tremendous success in Australia, Singapore also. Everywhere we go, we've been well received because right now, dementia takes more lives than anybody else in the world. And the bad news is that the latest statistics are that everybody born today, 1 in 3 will die of dementia if we don't make a cure, or the world of medicine doesn't make a cure. Can you imagine 1 in 3 people we're talking about, and more people die of dementia currently than any other illness in the world? So it's the biggest challenge I've ever made or ever had. But of course, Formula One is a perfect balance. Formula One itself, Domenicali has been very generous at letting us get people into the paddock and into the pits and into everything, to give people an advantage of where Formula One is. And from that, they see the need for change, and then they give money for it. So it's a charity, obviously. Nobody gets any benefit out of it other than the charity. So really, it's the biggest challenge, as I said, I think earlier, that I've ever made or I've ever had. But at the same time, motor racing still glamorous, colourful and exciting, and the life of Jackie Stewart.
I mean, they are such frightening statistics, and obviously all the work the charity is doing is truly amazing. You mentioned, obviously, the support of Red Bull and McLaren, obviously, and what you're doing with them. It's Red Bull and McLaren which have given us this quite fabulous season. Ian and I, after the opening rounds, like many others, were expecting Max and Red Bull to cruise away like they did last season. That's not been the case. So, Jackie, what have you made of this year? Because it has been remarkable.
A good year. Constant performance of victory sooner or later gets boring. Whether it was Mercedes-Benz at the time of them winning world championships consistently, to Red Bull coming along, the 2 or 3 drivers that have had such an enormous role to play, Lewis, for example, and then looking at Verstappen now, he's the example of today. So there's always somebody around the corner. And that somebody is usually a new one. And we just began to see that in the next 3 or 4 past races that we've had this year in Formula One. And it's stimulating for me to see that youth coming along. I mean, I don't think I was a racing driver in Formula One at their age when they're now winning. I had to, because I was shooting, trap shooting, clay pigeon shooting around the world, because I did so for Scotland and Great Britain. But coming into motor racing, I was still considered young at that time, although Jim Clark was pretty much the same age as me, I think a little bit older than I, but Graham certainly was, Jack Brabham certainly was, etc. And my time then, of course, was different, because exciting and as glamorous as it was also terrible for the taking of life. Most of my best friends are no longer with us because they died in a racing car, Formula One racing car. Whether that was Jochen or whether it was all my other friends that passed away. My own teammate in what was my last to-be Grand Prix in my whole career, it was to be my 100th. But I withdrew the day before because Francois died that same day. And I thought it wasn't right for me to drive again when we had lost Francois in such a violent way. All the drivers saw it because they all came out and stopped to try and help. But of course it was such a giant mistake at a very, very high level. So he died on the spot. So these things have got good memories and bad memories. But in my time, I think I've seen both more clearly than most people, even in the sport. So I love the fact that the sport has become so safe and yet still so deeply, extravagantly expensive, successful. Now the cockpit is a survival cell. It's fantastic. And that's come from engineering and technology reacting. Whether it was myself, but, seeing all my friends die, wanting to do something about it and managing to do something about it, because it was really fast asleep with regards to safety. And with my entry into that, because I was world champion at the time, going on, I could get more media, such as yourselves, to talk about the problem. Why is it so dangerous? Why are we not having proper runoffs? Why have we not deformable structure? Nico Hakkinen, who still comes to Grand Prix to this day, died in Australia 3 times. He died in the car. And 3 times, because they had the equipment, brought him back to life, and here he is today, still very much part of our life in Formula One. So the progress from the Bernie Ecclestone days to the days we have now with ownership in the United States of America, we've got a bigger sport than any other in the world. Bigger than American football, bigger than soccer in Europe, bigger than any other sport successfully. Partially, drives a car today. What used to be a 1-car family is now a 4-car or 5-car family. And they all want to go, and women are as into Formula One today as men. So in my life, I've had a wonderful collection of times and with fantastic people. So from that point of view, that for me still goes on.
I was going to say, at least, Sir Jackie, as you say, things have changed so dramatically over a period of time. And right now we are in the midst of what is a really good championship battle, as Nick mentioned initially. What do you make of, you mentioned about the young guys coming through. Obviously, Max is still only 26, but now we've got Lando starting to show what he can do in that McLaren. What have you made of Lando Norris this season in particular, and the fact that now he's, as I say, starting to come through, he's winning races finally, getting that monkey off his back earlier this year. What have you made of Lando? And has he got a shot at the title? It's 52 points, quite a gap with 6 Grand Prix, but we've got 3 sprint races now. And what have you made of the sprint races as well?
Well, I like the idea, but the purity of the Grand Prix is what really matters to me. To see that avenue of youth coming in so strongly is also, I think, terrific. It's very nicely balanced at the highest level at the present time, because McLaren have come alive from a period where it wasn't quite so important, if you like, in the sport. They have now the front end of it with 2 very young drivers. And that's lovely. And Verstappen still is a serious threat to any of those, as is Red Bull. Great leadership in both teams at the present time, with 2 personalities that are being covered by you, the media, at every corner of every lap of every race. And the public, because of the scale of your media now, is bigger than it's ever been before. In my day, they could hardly see television. I saw a picture of me winning my first Grand Prix in the Matra in Italy, in Monza, and you could hardly see the vehicle. And Murray Walker was very enjoyable about it, and trying to give everybody the best possible understanding of what was going on. But the vision was poor. Now, every racing car in Formula One has got more, sometimes 3 and 4 and 5 cameras on the car. And we're seeing it real time. That, I think, is fantastic. I think the sport is by far the most dynamic of any in the world, with equipment as well as human talent. I mean, soccer or American football or baseball from the States as well. Not the same. Everybody in the world drives a car today, man or woman. They all drive cars. They all have an association with what is Formula One. And it's colourful, it's glamorous, it's exciting, huge amounts of money to the drivers and the teams. When I was driving at the beginning of my career, as it was for Jim Clark, Graham Hill, Jack Brabham, a lot of these guys, Chris Amon, we had to drive different cars every week, different categories every week, whether it was touring cars, Can-Am cars, Indy cars, Formula 2 cars. We raced Formula 3 at the same time as Formula 1. And we did all the big touring cars. Walter Hayes, a great Englishman with Ford Motor Company, had Graham Hill and I, doing touring car races all over the world, because he was developing through a big multinational corporation called Ford, and they were fully behind the motorsport thing. And for Paul to start motor racing, and then start Paul Stewart motor racing, and then Stewart Grand Prix, have all been a period of time with the drivers of the past, in my case, and then the young drivers that today and tomorrow we saw. And, the loss of Jochen and so forth was just something that was taken almost by nature. It was so seriously bad. And that's no longer the case. It's better today than it's ever been. So really, I think I've been one of the very few, because all my friends are no longer with me. My Graham Hills and my Jim Clarks and my Jochen Wentz, etc. are not here anymore. Nina comes to my home here in Switzerland. We live a kilometre apart, and we're still as close to each other as we ever were for Helen and Harm, because they were doing all these usual jobs that the girls did. And there was the paddock club that they went to, the women's little club that they had for all of them. So after the timekeeping was finished, they would go to their little area that every Grand Prix circuit provided for them. That doesn't happen today. The wives or the girlfriends of drivers, really, you see them in the back of the garage. Not the same.
You also mention about just how far the safety of the car has come. It's now a survival cockpit, which is allowing the drivers to push so hard. We saw in Lando, he brushed the wall multiple times in Singapore, just about got away with it. How good is it that we're able to now see the drivers pushing, even in Lando's case, to the limit, despite leading by 20-odd seconds?
Well, I think your example is the answer, and that was Singapore. I mean, I fully expected to have seen several accidents taking place on that circuit, perhaps more than any other circuit at high speed and so forth. And there it was. Nobody had an accident in that Grand Prix. I was amazed. I didn't want it to happen, but I was amazed that it did happen, that they got through without that. And of course, the odd kiss that we saw, the car, everything's been made a little bit better, stronger than we've had before. And clearly, the limitations involved in Formula One, there's no other sport in the world that is so dynamic as that, so potentially dangerous as that, but is safer than anybody else in the world driving a car and probably an aeroplane as well. We've really got a wonderful, wonderful sport, and it's totally global now.
Do you think with Lando now performing so well, and obviously with Lewis Hamilton now approaching the latter stages of his career, are we starting to see a little bit of the changing of the guard of the British drivers? Because for so many years, Lewis has been that driver flying the Union Jack high.
Yes, they've been flying the Union Jack high. The Union Jack's pretty big. The Italian flag is just a bit smaller, and the German one has disappeared because the famous German Mercedes-Benz isn't in Stuttgart, it's in Milton Keynes in England. That's where the capital of motorsport in Formula One lives. So therefore we've seen an enormous change. But because it is the motor vehicle, it is because that so many people are driving it in every corner of the world, it's become a monster. And it's been a well-managed monster, whether it be through the Bernie's days and before Bernie. And before Bernie, it was pretty bad. There was no safety. It was pretty ridiculous, and that was my biggest challenge in my whole life, was trying to change that around. But, from then to go to the Americans, who now own the product of Formula One. So it's gone through a very positive rise in its presence globally. And of course, television has become more powerful globally. So we have a sport today that is stronger than it's ever been in the whole history of the motor vehicle. But there's always been a motor vehicle, whether it was in the early days from village to village with the rich guys who had cars, or the horseless carriage as it was called, to the Brooklands, to the Silverstones, to the Monacos, and these new established, and now established, just we speak of what we've just had in a Grand Prix in a different part of the world than we could ever have dreamed of having a motor race. And Singapore is a perfect example of that. Beautifully run, huge enthusiasm for it. But that applies now to all these Grand Prix in America. It's not just Indianapolis now, or Daytona. It's at least 3 very good Formula One circuits.
So, Jackie, one of the things I'd like to discuss with you, if you don't mind, and certainly comparing it to your day, one of the biggest talking points across the Singapore Grand Prix weekend was, of course, the use of foul language, and Max Verstappen used the F word during an official FIA press conference. That came on the same day that the FIA president, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, had turned around and said that he wanted the drivers to swear less over the radio. He felt it didn't add anything to the show. Obviously, yes, it's another one of those that technology has moved on so far from your day that we now get to hear the drivers over the radio, their thoughts. And obviously, yes, they do, because they're under such pressure, they do use bad language sometimes. So I just wondered, compared to your day, what you now felt about the drivers swearing. Again, 2 different eras, I know completely, but just fascinated to get your thoughts on it, if you don't mind.
Well, we just never swore.
The age of the gentleman driver, of course.
Everything was so well done. Ken Tyrrell's team, I don't remember ever swearing at any of the mechanics or at Ken Tyrrell during my entire career with him. It wasn't in the package. I think I think it was a strange, small thing that occurred. It would have been better without it, because in lots of sports it would have been potentially killed to be a reward that should not have occurred. But it wasn't dangerous. But nevertheless, we have to keep our house in order. And we're also involved with a great variety of youth coming into our sport, from little children now going to Grand Prix, to women being in Grand Prix races, and to grown men. So I think we have to present ourselves as correctly as we should. But because it hasn't been happening at all, it's become a moment of considerable global television and print about one word. And I didn't think he had done it intentionally. It just came out as part of his recommendation of a moment. So I'm sorry that it's caused so much well, of course it gets picked up with the media, because the media that we have today is so global in every sense. The internet gets it like that. So there's no escaping whether it's good, bad or ugly that occurs nowadays. We've got to be more cautious, I suppose, in that respect. But even in the days of Graham and I and Jimmy, there was T and Jochen. It never came up somehow or other. It wasn't heard of, or of course there weren't the same microphones hanging around the world as we have today. There's no escaping now. We're seeing at 200 miles an hour the same way as we are, excluding some choice of words that may not be quite suitable as they should have been. Whether it be mechanics, whether it be pilots, and whether it be team principals.
That's a whole another matter. You mentioned obviously how the audience is becoming younger. We're getting more families watching Formula One. We're also getting now much younger drivers. We've obviously got next season Oliver Bearman coming into Haas. We've obviously got as well the Mercedes teenage sensation Andrea Kimi Antonelli. What do you make of drivers so young making their way into F1? Because we are seeing now this, as you mentioned at the top of the podcast, this young charge of drivers coming through.
Fantastic. But it's possible today more easily than it was. Keep in mind that karting didn't exist in the Jackie Stewart life when I was starting. I was clay pigeon shooting at that time. And there was hardly anything to do with motorsport that you could do other than be a club driver or a national driver or an international driver. Whether it be the great Fangio, it was a totally different thing that one or two people gave their lives focusing in motorsport, because there was, and of all places, Argentina, in the middle of nowhere, more than one top Grand Prix driver came from there, but they had to come out of their own country. They had to come to Europe. Now, it's not a big deal coming out of another country and coming to Europe. And it's still Britain. It's the capital of it all. So I don't think I think it's because, like everything else, the karting has become so sophisticated. I mean, I went after the Grand Prix in Bahrain this year, I went back to a karting facility that I hadn't seen before in Bahrain, and I was responsible for a lot of the reality of Bahrain becoming a Formula One team, because the Crown Prince happens to be a very good friend. And he was responsible for getting this karting facility made available. Beautiful in every respect. Spectator space, terrific. Visibility, timing. I'm sitting up on the top of the so-called grandstand, and I see a big sign going up, Jackie Stewart, taking the mickey out of me. But it was as important as a Formula One timekeeping message. So karting has become so popular and so available, still very expensive. I mean, whether it's women today, because we need to have women in Formula One in my mind. We should have women in Formula One. There is no reason why a woman can't be in Formula One. Not at all. Nothing to do with physique or anything else. But they don't go to karting as much as boys do. Little boys do. And little girls are doing other things generally. And that's not me being sexually silly. But if we had more women, young girls, doing what the names that you just mentioned earlier coming into McLaren, it was all through karting. And Lewis Hamilton, his daddy was having 4 jobs to keep the money necessary for him to go around the world and become the multiple world championship that he has, all because of karting. So we've got it. We're lucky to have it. If you're an aviator, there's not many opportunities to learn to fly a plane. Karting, you can go in and do it in 5 and 10 quid. And that's still a lot of money for a wee Scottish boy to pay, but it's available. So I think we've come through a growth rate that's very visible. It's a reality. We're now seeing the potential of women coming in. but it'll never be strong unless the women come in more fully. Young women, what else are they doing? There's lots of other things for them to do. The little boys are desperate to drive a car. Now, all these women are driving cars. Why are they not as desperate? Well, they are becoming more desperate to be at karting. It is expensive, but there's no reason at all why one of them couldn't be a regular Formula One driver. And who knows? Why not a world champion?
You touched on world champion. You touched on Lewis. It'd be a good topic on which to conclude this podcast, Sir Jackie. Obviously, Lewis is going to be joining Ferrari next season. It's been one of the biggest stories of this season. Obviously, kicked off very early when he announced that in early February the 1st, that call was made. Just wondered, he's been building up all season to this now. He's leaving behind him a tremendous legacy, of course, of what he's achieved at Mercedes. Won 6 of his 7 world titles with the Mercedes Formula One team. And so I just wondered what your thoughts now that Lewis is going to be 40 next year, going to Ferrari, in particular at that age as well.
Yes, I'm somewhat surprised by that because of becoming 40 and going into a team that at the present time has become very recently very competitive. It went down quite a lot. There's been very many management structures within the Ferrari Formula One team that's disruptive. When that happens, it is disruptive. So they've now got a more stable situation around them. And Lewis is seeing, when you go to the Ferrari factory, you're impressed. You can go to Red Bull, you can go to McLaren. McLaren, because of the architecture of their headwork factory. It is a factory. Ferrari has been a factory for far beyond my life. Mr. Fangio just went from Ferrari to Maserati to Mercedes-Benz, and whenever he felt as if the best car was there for him to drive, he went. That has become not the same. And Britain became the capital of the world of top line, particularly Formula One Grand Prix drivers, and therefore the equipment that they have. Just look at Milton Keynes. It is the world of Formula One, and all these other countries, including the great Mercedes-Benz, are there because the talent is good and the equipment is good, and that's what's got it right. Now, on the other hand, hardly any other brand, if you like to call it, in Formula One has had anything like the same continuity as Ferrari have had from such a long time. I nearly drove for Ferrari. In fact, I committed to drive for Ferrari right in the contract, and I had to tell them that it was no longer practical because of the manner in which it had become almost an everyday change at Mr. Ferrari's moment. So I never did drive for Ferrari. But when I went there, I was taken aback. It was so impressive. The spirit of the place was amazing. The Italians are great people. They explain themselves very colourfully and excitingly. And I, like anybody else, and I'm sure that's what Lewis is experiencing too. It's more difficult for him to do it, I think, at 40 years than it would have been if he had been 25 or 30 years. But he's still got the skill and talent, as is obvious at the present time, such as the British Grand Prix this year. So I don't think it's anything, it's unusual. But at some point, he has to retire as a racing driver. And he feels that time has not yet arrived. And I can understand that. In my life, I stopped at a very young age by today's standards. But I was burned out. I had juvenile, I had all sorts of dramas. And because I think it was at 72 or 77 years, I crossed the Atlantic one year. 70s in one single year, 70 odd times between one form of motorsport and another. And that was just between America and Europe. There was all sorts of things happening in South America. I mean, I went to lots of different things in the way up to my Formula One, top end of my Formula One life. But we had to do that to make decent money. That's no longer true. Now the money is very, very big. Never has it been as big as it is today. And I think that's wonderful. And I'm sure it's a very successful negotiation that Lewis has had with the team at Ferrari to find themselves at his choice into that team. But so also was those other teams. The Mercedes team is not without money. So therefore he's had a very good period in his life and done it very well. And this is, I think, his biggest challenge. Because we've got the young puppies coming up, as you all wait to talk to them about them, but it's the way it is. There's better talent coming along. And there's better commitment financially by outside people to come into Formula One. Right now, there's more interest from America, for example, of new financial interest than there's ever been before. So all of those things are important. But at the end of the time, the current Grand Prix driver only does what? How many races? 25?
24.
How many? 24.
24 this season,
well,
yeah.
Then I probably did 80 races in a year in different countries. Non-championship events, touring cars, GT cars, Can-Am cars, etc. And I'm not saying that was a good thing at all, but it was what was available to us, and that applied to Jim Clark along with myself, and obviously it was Jimmy or Jack Brabham who got us into Indianapolis. And now we can go to Indianapolis anytime we want as a Formula One driver and get a ride. So the sport is growing at a level that I don't think any other sport has even got close, whether it's equestrian or whether it's soccer or whether it's rugby or whether it's cricket. Nothing's got the pull, the colour, the glamour, the excitement, and the financials.
So, Jackie, it has been an absolute honour and a privilege to be joined by you. Ian, have you got any closing remarks?
No, I just want to say thank you ever so much to Jackie. Obviously, super grateful for you giving up some time today. Obviously, you've done tremendous work over the years to not only improve Formula One safety, as you've touched on in this podcast, but also with regard to the race against dementia. So our kindest regards and respects as well to your lovely wife, Helen. So, and as always, again, thank you ever so much for appearing today. It was a real pleasure. And you.
I hope it was okay. And with Racing Against Dementia at some point, doesn't matter how small the contribution, if you and your friends or the business or sport can give a little bit, it's a big little bit, because it's needed badly. We've got to find a cure for dementia. And the only way that'll happen is by buying the best talent and being able to get the best access. So that's just one little way of going away for the rest of today.
Absolutely. This has been the latest episode of the Racing News 365 podcast. From Sir Jackie, Ian and I, we will see you next time. Thank you very much.
Take care,
Thank you.
folks.